for taking the time. Thank you all for taking the time to be here today. I really appreciate it. And before we start, I just want to acknowledge everyone who's been impacted by the recent weather and flooding across the country. It's been incredibly disruptive and scary for a lot of people. So just wanted to acknowledge that. My name is Stacey Robertson. I'm the Access, Inclusion and Participation Advisor, or Kaiarahi Atoi, for Arts Access Aotearoa. For anyone who's new to the Arts for All Network, my role is to support you all to develop and increase accessibility for deaf and disabled artists and audiences across your work in the arts. Also joining us in the meeting from Arts Access Aotearoa, we have Millie Hampton, Advisory Programs Assistant, and they're going to be assisting with running the Zoom. I've been unwell and I still have a bit of a cough. Hopefully it won't be too disruptive, but if needed, Millie's going to take over. So just to let you all know that that might happen. Please just bear with me for a moment while I run through some housekeeping and explain how the Zoom will run. Firstly, note that the Zoom meeting is being recorded. You can turn your camera off if you like, and I'd ask that you please leave your microphone muted. If you are able to, please include your name, pronouns, and organization, if you work with one, in your name bar. You can change that by clicking on the 3 white dots on the top of your video tile. Because we have so many people joining us today, we're going to run the hui like a webinar. So please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. And if you'd like to ask a question of our speakers today, please also add that to the chat. You can open the chat window by clicking the chat button on the bottom of your screen. You can also message individuals privately, but do note that those messages will be visible to us in the meeting transcript. I'll be keeping an eye on questions, and we will try and get through as many as we can at the end of the presentation. And I'll follow up with any that we don't get through after the hui. Excuse me. If typing in the chat doesn't work for you, please use the raise hand feature and we'll invite you to speak. This meeting is being NZSL interpreted. Thank you to Platform Interpreting for interpreting for us today. The interpreters will stay on screen throughout the meeting alongside our speakers, and they will need to switch periodically, and when they'll do, they'll just interrupt to let us know, and we'll just pause while they do that. So with housekeeping out of the way, I'd love to introduce our guest speakers today, Henrietta Bollinger and Nathan Mudge, who co-wrote the new resource in the Playmarket guideline series called Working Together, Accessibility in Aotearoa Theatre, which has just been published and is available to order off the Playmarket website for $6. And there is also a digital version in the works. This guide is a best practice guide for working with practitioners and communities with access needs. It covers programming, planning, policies, budgets, contracts, writers, remuneration, rehearsal rooms, schedules, warm-ups, intimacy, costumes, and makeup and design. It has an extensive section on casting, advice, discusses creating new work, and finding funding, along with information on audio description, sign language, relaxed performances, and content warnings. So it's very comprehensive, and it's been designed to work alongside the Arts for All resource that some of you will be familiar with. So it kind of expands and builds upon that resource and takes a bit of a deeper look into some theatre-specific accessibility. And I want to acknowledge Murray and the wider Playmarket team for their support of this kaupapa and the resource. And I also want to thank all the deaf and disabled artists who shared their knowledge and experience, and those who wrote sections for the guide: Emily Duncan, Helen Vivian Fletcher, Katie Querin, and Rachel Turner. And while this guide is theatre focused, there is a lot that is transferable across art form types, and I think it'll be a really awesome resource. So over to Etta and Nathan. Would you like to introduce yourselves, please? Maybe if we start with Etta.
Thanks, Stace. Am I? Oh yeah, I'm off.
Yeah, you're good.
Thanks, Stace. I'm Henrietta, or Etta. My sign name is Etta. it's like a joystick control of my electric wheelchair. So that's where that comes from. And was gifted to me by a cousin of mine who's deaf and was also my teacher of sign language for a while. I've been a disability advocate and also a playwright myself, and came from a family with kind of a long history in the arts, and so this, I guess, being invited onto this project by Nathan and Playmarket was this really lovely interesting moment of, bringing together these two elements of my work that I'd kind of seen as quite separate up to that point. Like, I always included disability in my work, but it was this lovely kind of confluence of the two things. And interestingly, at the time I was also performing in a play, so everything kind of was feeding each other, which was lovely.
Awesome. Thanks, Nathan.
Kia ora rā tātou, ko Nathan tōku ingoa, ko Ngāti Kuki Airani te iwi. I'm originally from Palmerston North. I was born and raised there. Currently based in Vancouver, Canada. It's snowing here today, which is a culture shock. I've been here for a month. Before I came here, though, I was based in Wellington, and started my career in theatre, I guess, as an actor, and then kind of branched out into producing as well. And my mother was a teacher aide, so I've always been aware of disabled people and their experiences, or at least the ones of those I knew. And so as a producer, accessibility became a significant part of my practice very early on. And so it just came to a point where Ita and Ita, with their lived experience, and me with my producing experience, were able to come together and kind of come up with something that we could contribute to our work pals in the industry. And here we are today, very happy and grateful to be here and to have worked with Ita and Stace and the rest of the team that put their time and energy into this. So tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora, Nathan, thank you. So could you both tell us about this resource and I guess the development of it? You've already shared a wee bit about how you came to be a part of creating it, but
so it started off when I was a script coordinator at Playmarket, and the team was jamming ideas on what the next guideline could be. And the Playmarket guidelines are a series that they produce that explore everything from cultural safety to intimacy to other topics. And when brainstorming what we could do next, naturally I suggested accessibility. I thought that would be a good thing that we could cover within a book format. And so I knew of Ita through their writing and through their work as a theatre practitioner generally. They're also represented by Playmarket. So I asked Ita if they would be involved, if they would write it with me. And from there, we just created a process together, and it's become a really valuable and meaningful work relationship for me. We're still working together on other projects now. And so that's kind of where this book specifically started.
Awesome. Thanks, Nathan. I think for me, it's been really exciting to see an organization like Playmarket kind of step into pushing forward around accessibility and providing this resource. And I'll just hold it up briefly. It'll be backwards because cameras, but it's a great published resource that is available off the Playmarket website, as I said. And one of the things that I thought was really valuable about this resource was that it was a very collaborative process with other deaf and disabled artists, and you actually invited several other artists to write chapters. What was your thinking behind this, and why was it important to you?
I mean, to me, disability rights and deaf rights and that wider community is that's always been a collaborative movement, and one of the kind of catch cries of disability rights anyway is nothing about us without us. So I was very well, both of us kind of had conversations about, Nathan and I both had conversations about, this is as far as our expertise goes, and this is the specific expertise that we're bringing. But we were conscious that there were other very talented people out there, and I particularly, as a disabled person, didn't want to speak for other disabled people because I think that's quite a common experience. The other part of it is that we kind of go into, and is particularly in the casting section, is this kind of assumption that there isn't the disabled talent out there, and actually we kind of knew that there was. It's just that due to kind of access barriers, those people's work may not be as visible, or their career paths may look very, very different to the kind of usual non-disabled and hearing kind of trajectory. You know, in Rachel Turner's piece, I think she talks about, you know, that being part of Equal Voices was this kind of opportunity, not only to kind of be part of creating something, but, you know, to be exposed to theatre and to be exposed to kind of also international conversations and stuff in a way that she hadn't had the opportunity before. And so, yeah, there's like limits on opportunity and therefore less visibility. And so I really wanted readers to go away with this kind of sense of that there is sort of abundant talent out there, and that really it's about removing barriers so that deaf and disabled artists can contribute on an equal playing field, and also on an equal stage, I suppose, and also not from that point of view of people being helped to participate, but from the point of view of these people already have so much to offer, and to facilitate that offering and that talent, you remove the barriers, not from this kind of perspective of giving deaf and disabled people something to do, which can sometimes kind of come into the perspectives on what access looks like.
Awesome. Thanks, Etta. Did you have anything you wanted to add, Nathan?
Yeah, I think for me, it's everything Etta said, and also that my experience in accessibility is purely as a producer. I don't have the lived experience of someone with a disability, and so the more perspectives, I think, made the document stronger. And I think we knew that from the beginning. That's something that's been evident in our practice as makers, where we're familiar with how to consider what people's needs are, whether they're disabled or not. Everyone has them, and the only way you do that is by listening to people. And so from the outset, that was a priority of ours, that we just would open up as many opportunities as possible to allow people to feedback, to give their perspectives, share what they would want to be seen in the document, so that we could ensure that as much as possible what we were delivering was something that could be useful and have a meaningful impact on the way that our industry works.
Awesome.
And I think also that people, one of the other parts to it to me was we're talking to creative people, and creative people respond to story. And so I wanted there to be stories of people's experience in there, because it's just another way that these ideas can kind of resonate too.
I think it made it a really powerful resource or guideline to read. And one of the things that I found really, meaningful about it was that those different perspectives really show the knowledge and insight that deaf and disabled people have around different ways of working, and how there's so much potential to change the way we work to benefit everyone, and that sometimes deaf and disabled people actually are incredibly creative ways of working that could really change the landscape of theatre practice in Aotearoa. And one of the things we've talked about was when disabled people come together, there's a lot of shared knowledge and experience. And one of the things I thought this resource did really well was kind of hold the space between being accessible to and engaging for non-disabled people, but also being really deep and meaningful for deaf and disabled people themselves, in terms of there's almost like a layer of speaking directly to deaf and disabled people combined. And I wondered, how did you go about translating kind of that deaf and disability kind of shared knowledge so that non-disabled people could learn from it and put things into practice? Because I know there's often there's so much that goes unspoken, because when you're amongst other deaf and disabled people, you just don't need to articulate and explain all that stuff.
Well, I mean, I think from our initial conversations, we kind of had this idea that we wanted it to be focused around a cultural shift rather than understanding accessibility as this process from start to finish, and this thing of continual improvement, rather than these kind of add-ons to the work that you already have created. I mean, that is still valuable to do if you have a work that you created before you kind of had access to this knowledge, because I understand as well that it's also about having access to the ways of creating accessibility. But yeah, we really wanted to focus around challenging people to think differently about what access looks like, and to be able to take it, I suppose, into their own practice and reflect on their own practice, rather than feeling like they were being given a list of do this, do this, do this, and this. Because if you can't see how that's going to work into your work, then you're less likely to apply it. And yeah, just trusting people, trusting practitioners that you're speaking to a creative bunch of people, and kind of, I suppose, framing accessibility as a creative proposition of like, how do you creatively make sure that everyone's in the room and everyone's being heard and able to be part of things. And also just that we found, and you might want to speak to this, Nathan, as well, we ran a couple of hui for deaf and disabled artists, and then had some one-on-one conversations as well. And across that, there was kind of just this theme of like, I mean, we nearly opened the book with just this like, don't be a dick was going to be the main sort of quote from, because it came up so often. Like, people would just kind of be like, well, just don't be a dick. And there was this kind of like understanding from disabled people of like, what that is, even though there's kind of specifics of the situations that people were talking about might be very, very different. It was sort of like there was this sense of just kind of treat people as people and make space for them, I suppose. Did you want to speak more to that, Nathan?
Yeah, I'll just total what you said again. I think that what excites me most about this is that generally the people that will be reading this book, or who this book that will be useful for, are creatives, and this offers us a creative whittle that we can all choose to take on. That when we apply this cultural shift of thinking about how disabled people exist in the world and exist within that industry, and then recognize that in most instances it's non-disabled people that have the responsibility to fix that, it's an opportunity for us to work together and be creative about what that process could look like. I think that it can be quite daunting for a lot of people who don't have that experience or don't have that knowledge. And so for us, it was just trying to take it beyond being about this is what you do and focusing on that, but even more so why we do it. And so that was just a huge learning opportunity for me too, because I got to sit in those rooms and listen to these different artists talk about what their perspectives are. And for me, it was wanting to excite people by what the potential of that could be, rather than overwhelm them with, you're going to have to transform the way that you work. It can be something that we can look forward to. And I do believe as artists, we have the capacity for that to filter out across other industries too. But if anyone's equipped to do it, it's the creatives that can actually think about how can we do this differently, that I think is what excites me most.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And I think when you get creatives calling for change and you get creatives and artists changing the way they work, it flows on into the built environment, and it flows on into so many other sectors of society, because everyone is engaging with the arts in some way in their life, whether they're kind of recognizing it or not. And I think the arts are generally that place where social movements shift and where social perceptions change. So I think it's really exciting to have that challenge to put forward. Etta, were you going to say something else?
Yeah, also the other side to that is people would definitely, there was a lot of generosity in the conversations around like, this is a journey and you have to start somewhere, and we all know that not every person or every organization is going to have all the knowledge from the beginning. But I think that was also one of the reasons why people wanted to get involved in it, because everyone that was involved in it was already invested in that journey of shifting perceptions and creating more access. And here's something that kind of brings it together, so that we're not I'm sure those individual conversations will continue, but that was one of the really nice things for me as well, was that realizing that there's all these people out there also doing, creating those spaces and pushing for access.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I think it adds a real, I guess, a really valuable tool to people's, the resources that are available. And one of the things we kind of worked together throughout the development of the resource, and we had a lot of conversations about, what's the angle of it, and who is it being pitched at, and what resources already exist that it can build on, rather than having to be another 101 resource, because I think often that's where things get pitched, is at the level of people who are completely new to starting accessibility, which is, really valuable. We need those resources. But I think the space that this resource landed in is kind of more of a kind of, you've kind of already started and you're wanting to deepen your work, or just kind of inviting that deeper consideration of accessibility. And I wondered if either of you had, as you were developing the resource, had a particular way in mind of how people would use the resource.
I mean, at the end of it, the conclusion sort of says, you know, we invite you to use this as a script, as you would a script. And what we kind of meant by that is that for scripted work anyway, but also, and I guess devising would start in a similar place, but with maybe some more space around it. You start with this blueprint, this provocation, I suppose, to work from, and then everyone, to bring that to life, everyone has to bring their individual skills and energy and effort towards putting that on stage and telling the story. And I guess the way of looking at it, the reason for looking at it like that is that, as Nathan said, accessibility and doing it right can be quite intimidating, and I want people reading this to go, actually, we may not have all the knowledge, and we can have the humility to acknowledge where we're at, but we do actually have the skills of the collective, and we've all got our individual strengths. And I actually think too that is one of the things that you find once you create inclusive spaces and accessible spaces, is that deaf and disabled people, when they're kind of when we're as a community being kind of included in a sort of afterthought sort of way, then that's the level that we're able to contribute on. If we're being included from the beginning, then we're able to bring our creative ideas and our energy and our problem solving to the beginning of processes, and we're therefore like able to contribute on a more at the same level as our peers. And I guess that's the distinction to make, is that when you conceive of access as this kind of small additive, it limits us. When you can kind of conceive of it as a whole way of thinking and working, then we can be included from the start.
Yeah, I go back to what you were saying about a 101 document, because that was definitely at the start of the process something that I assumed was where this document would go, but it became apparent quite quickly that to write a 101 document, it would date very quickly. That being because disability is obviously an evolving concept. It reflects where we are at as a society, and as societies move, the barriers can slightly change. And so for us to then redirect the document to be more about a cultural shift, why we do accessibility, and then giving people the opportunity to consider how they can make their own individual practices more accessible, that would be more useful of a document. So I guess that's what I hope people would get out of it reading it, is that they could just read more broadly from different people about what the disability experience is like in the arts industry, and then use that information to critically consider what they're doing and how they can change their own practices. The risk in being too specific is that it starts to become not relevant to some people, but accessibility is relevant to everyone, and we all have different ways in which we could improve that within our work.
And we also, I mean, in terms of other booklets in the series, guides in the series, we were they were sort of also about collaboration and cultural shifts. So we wanted there to be kind of some resonance in the ways of thinking, like, hey Nathan, like we kind of looked and spoke quite a lot about the guide that was around working in sort of bicultural and treaty honouring ways, and and then there's also the guide on sort of audience safety, and actually all those things feed in and speak to accessibility as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that came through really strongly was a sense of equity and a sense of justness, if that's the right word. It's an invitation for people to think about how they could do their own access, as you say, but it's kind of stayed away from that prescriptive, this is how you do it. And I think it will be relevant for a long time. And I really appreciated that it did kind of frame disability as a cultural construct, and really reinforce that the deaf experience is very different to disability, and that's a different cultural construct as well. And I really loved what Rachel Turner had included from Equal Voices about a non-hierarchical way of devising work, and not working from a script and not prioritizing English, because Equal Voices Arts is working in a way that honors both sign language and English equally, and is providing that and fostering that space for deaf community to have a place in theatre and in the arts. And I think there's so much there for other communities to consider in the way we work, and in terms of how do you create or remove, how do you remove the systems and processes that kind of perpetuate marginalization or prevent people from having a voice. So I'm really excited for the conversations that come from this resource, I think. One thing I was curious about is, were there any findings from your consultation that were surprising to you?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually surprised by how that there can be diversity in the experience, and diversity in the kind of angle that people are, like the areas that people are working, but that there was this kind of solidarity and this kind of this kind of unity in sort of what people were asking for, in terms of just the right to be part of it, and the ability to kind of have processes that reflect their ways of being and working in the world. I mean, of course, there's like diversity of opinion around things like who can write disabled characters, and how do you go about that sensitively, or like who can perform as disabled characters and those kind of things. But those are sort of details, but there was this kind of ethic of this kind of ethic of like respect and acknowledgement, and it was just really nice to kind of engage with people as deaf and disabled people, but also professionals at the same time, because I think often non-disabled companies, for example, will be looking for advice, and so you become the disabled voice, as opposed to being able to be that to like stand in your own as an artist. Not that people do that intentionally, and not that it isn't valuable to just come at a process from one point of view, but yeah, really nice for me to be basically talking to both my community as deaf and disabled people, and then also simultaneously speaking to them as artists and practitioners. And there was just seemed in the conversations a lot of respect for each other, which, yeah.
That's awesome.
I'm not sure if there was necessarily huge surprises for me, but I definitely learned a lot of new things. What I said before about that pivot to discussing it as a cultural shift rather than a 101, it made sense once we did it, and so I'm excited about people reading the book and applying to that to their work, using their creativity to do that. There were some interesting discussions that we had, Ita and I, amongst ourselves after conversations with Māori artists about colonization as a disabling force. I had never really perceived it as that, but it makes sense. Disabled people within Te Ao Māori, they hold a different place to what they do in the Pākehā world, and how, I guess, that intersectionality between disabled people, between Indigenous people, obviously different experiences, but what that does for non-disabled people or non-Indigenous people in these situations is puts the onus on them to come up with solutions, to work together, like the title of this book says, to figure out how we address those things. Yeah, I feel like I'm just throwing different thoughts in because it did conjure up a lot for me, and I'm still working out what that means, what I think that means to me and what I think that means to the industry. But yeah, that was something that I learned.
That's awesome. Thanks, Nathan. Ita, you mentioned train of thoughts just slipped. You mentioned that there was a gosh, what was it? Sorry, I'm just going to go to the next question and hope that one comes back to me. Where am I? Are there, like, this resource has come out as a published document now, and I know there's a digital version coming, but are there plans to create any other accessible formats? If you can answer that question.
Nathan.
Yes. Yeah, there are plans. That was something that we had planned for from the beginning. Unfortunately, it took us not unfortunately, it took the time it needed to write the document itself. And so now that we've finished that and it's gone to publication, then that's the next step for this document, is us working out what the accessible documents we need are, and then implementing those. The large text version will be out very soon, but we're also exploring NZSL videos that do segments of it, but obviously that's a costly venture that's going to take some investment by us, which we're underway with at the moment.
And yeah, we'd really like to sort of hear, I guess, as people start to use it, or as community kind of hear about it, what formats would be useful as well, and then maybe what other additional, because we're very conscious that the book, as being part of a series, had a particular format that we did adapt, but had a particular length as well that we had to keep to, and so we have not by any means been able to cover everything. So we're still interested in hearing from people about how they're using it, or what other resources they think are needed, what other gaps there are.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ita. I've remembered what my earlier question was. You mentioned that you know, there's been conversations around who gets to write disabled characters, and obviously people have differing opinions on that, but I wondered, you know, what, as a disabled writer, theatre practitioner, what's your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are complicated, but I think what I come back to is who is profiting from, like, I really feel like minority stories are very precious, especially when there hasn't been the platform or the stage for them. And, you know, it's that stuff we were talking about before, that there's a certain level of understanding that disabled people, deaf and disabled people can bring to those experiences that, you know, it is just beyond the experience of non-disabled people. And it's not that they can't develop empathy around that, which I do think non-disabled people working in that work, you know, that is one of the things that it brings, is this stories have this ability to help us to empathize and you know, go deeper emotionally than just having someone explain to you kind of what the rules the rules of access or the rules of an experience are. But I think it's about, to me, it's about recognizing that certain communities have had limits on their opportunity, and if you're going to then write those characters, those communities should be benefiting primarily from those stories. You know, and again, it's just that thing of nothing about us without us. We have to be there for that to be an authentic story. I mean, I think about the play that I was in while I was working on this, and it was The Normal Heart. It was like the second or third time that I'd performed on stage, first time in a full-length piece, and I only went for it because it was a disabled character, and that they were specifically looking for and prepared to cast a disabled person. And that was what kind of opened me up to, oh, maybe I could do this. And, you know, I got to learn so much from that experience. But I was then watching, there was a professional production of the same show in that I think the National Theatre did in England, and the actress in that received, I think, an Olivier nomination. She got up in her speech and said, you know, this is the first time in Liz Carr was. She's an actress and a writer and a disability activist, and she got up and said, you know, it's the first time in 30 years of this play, which has been, you know, was written in the 80s, first time in 30 years that this play has been staged professionally with a disabled actress. And so even at that level, you know, these are conversations that we're still having.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think particularly for that play and that character who was based on, you know, a real person who was a disabled woman, it really highlights the fact that there hasn't been that, you know, that opportunity for disabled people to play, you know, characters of disabled people. And, you know, especially when you think back to, you know, the amount of non-disabled actors who have won Oscars and things for portraying disabled characters. I think it's quite a stark example of that lack of opportunity, and that perception that disabled people, you know, aren't able to do this. And I always think back to May Soon Zayed's TED talk, where she talks about, she's an actor in the States with cerebral palsy, and she talks about auditioning to play a character with CP, and she doesn't get the role, and she gets told that, oh, we just didn't think you could do it. And she was like, well, if I can't do it, the character can't do it either. And I always think of that story, and it's a good example. But and it's what you've shared has been so valuable. And I wondered, are there any examples of groups or organizations who you think are starting to do this work, or who are on the right track?
Do you want to start, Nathan?
Yep.
Just
I think that there are a lot of organizations that I can speak for theatre because that's where more of my knowledge is, but there are a lot of theatres now that are incorporating access into their practice. I'm biased because Ita and I are working with them, but Tawhiri are making great steps, consulting with us and with Arts Access and with the wider community about a strategy, which I think is something that a lot of arts organisations should look into, developing a strategy and a policy for your organisation to establish what that culture is for you, and then starting to make plans with that being taken into consideration. Yeah, I think there are a lot of arts organisations now that are heading in that direction. And I guess what we wanted to make sure this document did was ensure that people weren't just stopping at NZSL performances and audio described performances and thinking that was it. Those are definitely valuable things, and we should have them, have more of them. But yeah, it's just trying to push everyone in the direction of establishing new ways of thinking about our practice and how we can make everything more accessible, not just the experience for the audience coming in to watch a show, but also the artists that participate backstage, the administrators, the employees that work at your organization. Accessibility goes beyond just the actual engagement with the arts, and it goes into making it and setting the policy for it and all of those things.
Absolutely.
I mean, of course, there's like there have been examples of sort of of people kind of starting to think about that stuff very early, like of course Touch Compass has been around for 30 years, and I did communicate a little bit with Jolt as well, but they were at the time headed overseas at the time that we were writing the resource. But yeah, I guess I get my hope personally from like the individual artists that are out there, and the ways as well that we're creating space for each other, and I guess insisting again on that collective voice and that kind of that there isn't just one perspective or one way of working. And I really, like I think I said earlier, it was just really heartening to hear from the artists that we did for the resource, and I really want to thank them for their huge generosity and trusting us as well to I guess take these interviews or hold the pieces of writing that they contributed and translate that into something. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I think the reason I asked that question is because it comes through really strongly in the resource that theatre companies and practitioners should work together to build access, and that it should be a collaborative process. And there's a really strong statement that access isn't something that anyone owns, and there's organizations like Timbray Theatre Company and so many others who are building ways of working that work for them. And I think it becomes so rich when we're able to learn from each other and share experiences and go, this worked for us, it might work for you, or you know, really have that space to collaborate and share knowledge. And yeah, I think that's where the Arts for All Network can be really helpful. And yeah, it's awesome to have opportunities like this to be able to kind of discuss, you know, different ways of thinking about access, and particularly to hear from deaf and disabled artists and practitioners about what works for them and what doesn't work, and to always be reflecting on the way that we're doing access and thinking, is this you know, the best way to be doing this, or you know, seeking feedback from community and you know, going what works for you and what doesn't work, and just really, you know, thinking of access as a reflective process. I guess as a last kind of question before we move over to questions from the audience here today, what's your hope for the future of theatre in Aotearoa? So it's a big one to end on.
I want to make more of it. I think, and yeah, and I would love it if yeah, if people would be able to sort of grow in their excitement about what accessibility can bring to it, and also just yeah, just that I know lots of the artists out there who are starting to kind of yeah, who have been trailblazing, I guess, in insisting on their voices and insisting on their work, being yeah, people like Duncan Armstrong and like Jacob Dombrowski. Those kind of people excite me, and I'm also potentially gonna you know, I'm potentially hoping to work with some of the people that contributed to the guide as well, or have already had the privilege of working with them in previous pieces of work. So yeah.
Awesome.
For me, I hope that we can see our organizations start to reflect the diversity of our society more. I'd love to see more immigrants, more POC, more BIPOC, more disabled people within our arts leadership roles within our organizations. And I'm excited about the possibility of when that happens, because I think that the creative opportunities that can come from us all working and collaborating together are really, really exciting. The potential that we can get from that, how we can change the way we do things, that will happen when the people that we're working with start to reflect the diversity of our society too, I think, and I'm excited for.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And I think, you know, to the folks on the call who are working in theatre companies now, you know, if your organization is in a position to be able to offer things like residencies, like commissions, please do reach out about how we can develop opportunities specifically for deaf and disabled artists and practitioners, and because those, as Etta and Nathan said earlier in the call, you know, often for deaf and disabled people, you don't have that same linear trajectory through the arts sector, and so having the opportunity to take up things like that really gives people a chance to get a foot in the door, and you know, gives disabled people a chance to think, I'd be really good at that, I want to give that a go. And you know, for our deaf and disabled artists who have been working for a long time, you know, more opportunities are needed. And you know, there's been some companies doing cool things, like, you know, Tahi Festival last year commissioned a disabled writer to write a 50-minute monologue as part of the development season. And, you know, those kind of opportunities are incredibly valuable, and we need more of that kind of thing. So if you think that's something your company might be in a position to do, then please reach out. But we'll jump over for questions shortly. But yeah, if anyone's kind of been sitting through the call today with questions, please pop them in the chat, but also feel free to reach out. Arts Access Aotearoa is always available to support and help you on your accessibility work. So yeah, I'm just going to check if we've got any questions, and oops, we've got a big one from Katie, and I'm just going to read this one out. So Katie has said, I find that theatres often get really excited about providing access programs, NZSL, interpreted, audio described, sensory relaxed shows, but making the shifts to diversify on the stage and among the tech office team to include disabled people is less enthusiastically received. What is a good positive way to guide people with this mindset to understand that access programs don't always mean a company is accessible, and that aiming for true access and inclusion can open doors and increase potential? It's a great question. Thanks, Katie.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and you would know, Katie, as well, I think, from your work, that access programs and kind of the assumption that deaf and disabled people are primarily audience has kind of been the way that we've been doing inclusion in the arts and arts accessibility, has been this kind of assumption that different people are sort of in I guess a passive position, or a position of being viewers and being audience rather than being creators and being active, and I mean, to be honest, I think that that's kind of an assumption that is society-wide and not just in the arts. But I guess to me it comes back to that question of just challenging people to think who is benefiting from these stories, who are we not seeing as well, and like how realistic is it that we're not seeing deaf and disabled people in our stories and in our workplaces, because that's 24% of the population, and yeah, I think there is just a lot of fear around what if we attempt inclusion and it goes wrong or is too hard. So I guess it's kind of shifting the conversation and to either what do you gain by including people, or what do you lose if you don't.
Yeah. You're on mute there, Nathan.
I think the creative challenge itself is a positive thing. I guess it's further to that, changing our mindset on how we respond to that challenge. The challenge doesn't need to be daunting, and there is not necessarily a right or wrong way of doing it. It's not an explicit, this is your list and you tick each box off. It's what are the processes that we work in, what are the venues that we work in, and how are people able to engage with that? Can they engage with that? And that's going to be different for every organization. So yeah, just embracing that, the possibilities of what that could be. It's an opportunity for us and our teams to work together and come up with solutions, and those solutions across companies might be different, but if we're all working towards the goal of breaking down those barriers, it can only be a good thing. And it's an ongoing thing. It's not something that you're expected to get perfectly off the bat. It's okay, so what worked this time, what didn't, and how do we improve that, and just keeping at it.
I think as well, one of the things that makes it difficult is that, or I guess one of the things we have to remind ourselves when kind of making those accommodations for deaf and disabled people to take on roles is that it's work. And I think we get it into that the arts is work, not that inclusion takes work, but it's work worth doing. But I mean that being an artist is work, or being a practitioner is work. And I think that having that conversation that people are entitled to reasonable accommodations in their workplaces. And I know that it kind of can be quite scary for theatre companies because of the kind of perceived expense. And I guess it's about about kind of recognizing it as work and valuing it as work, and therefore attaching to that the fact that for people to work effectively, they're entitled to the supports that they need.
And I think, it's really about being strategic in how you do that work, like as an organization, reflecting on what currently is or isn't accessible about your organization, and what barriers would someone have to navigate around, and what could you do to remove those barriers. And I think it's about creating a space of cultural safety. I know, there's a lot of people working in the arts who have chronic health conditions and disabilities who are not comfortable to share those in their workplaces, because the way we work in the arts is often not accessible, and there's a perception that if I tell someone I have a disability, maybe I'm not going to get work, and all those kind of things. So I think, as a wider sector, we have a responsibility to kind of shift some of that thinking, so that people and really demonstrate that we are including disabled people, and that we're open to different ways of working, because otherwise people are going to keep pushing through when they don't need to. And I've done that in the past, and it's been really detrimental to my work and to myself. So I think that's a big part of it. And I think if an organization is already running an access program, then perhaps the next questions are, what will we need to do so that this access program can be run by disabled people? What are we doing to ensure that deaf and disabled artists and arts practitioners are on the stage and part of that access program? And using that work that's already happening as a leverage point to deepen the accessibility of that organization. I know physical buildings are always a struggle, and sometimes the issue is our building is just not accessible, and we're not in a position to be able to move. And I think COVID really demonstrated how we can work in flexible ways that still build a team environment and bring people together. So and not having one person working off site means they're isolated and all those kind of things. So there's lots of different ways to start to do that work, but it definitely is a mindset shift in a kind of art sector, cultural sector shift as well in our organization. So
You're exactly right too. If there was ever a situation that highlighted the capacity we have to actually make these changes, it was the pandemic. We all moved very quickly to adapt, to look after each other and to protect each other's health. Businesses around the country suddenly had the capacity to do those things. And it's the exact same cultural viewpoint that drove us to do that for one another that we could be applying in this situation. How do we consider what is the state that society's in right now, and how do we change the way that we work to accommodate those things? We all moved to Zoom, and for some people that's stuck, because we saw how it was beneficial to some people, some more than others, to be able to have that access to our work through a digital platform. And so I think that we all have the capability to do this. we've shown that we can. Yeah.
Thank you. Just shouting out to other participants. Does anyone else have any other questions? So we've got one from Alison Walls. I love that you included intimacy in the guidelines. Do you have any further thoughts on intimacy directors working with deaf and disabled folks? Should they always be part of the process? Is there enough intersection currently between accessibility, advocacy, and intimacy training? I think you'll have lots to say on this one, Etta.
Oh, I do. So yeah, I wrote that section because I'm very interested in sort of the role of intimacy coordinators anyway, and wanted to think about how it sort of applied differently or similarly to working with deaf and disabled people. I think generally we don't talk about, like as a society, we don't talk about deaf and disabled people as having intimate lives, really. We don't talk about deaf and disabled people as having sexualities, as being desirable, as you know, as that being a possibility for their lives. And so that's kind of a whole thing on its own, and that's one of the stories that we tell about deaf and disabled people, is that that's not an element of their lives. But then I was also thinking as well about you know, the fact that there is very specific intimacies that are inherent to kind of needing support from other people or needing to use equipment. And I sort of wanted to highlight those in terms of what, like, no, I don't think there's enough intersection in terms of what we could do about that. I think it would be about, I mean, I think the exciting thing about intimacy coordination is that it's a new role, and it was a response as well to listening to the experiences of women and gender minorities and their experience of being performers, and responding to that in a sort of how do we take this seriously, and how do we give it the weight that we would usually give something like stage combat? How do we give it, how do we respond in a way that keeps people safe? But I think the exciting thing about it being this new is that it's open, and if intimacy coordinators want to start talking about how do we do this for deaf and disabled people, I think there's a lot of space for collaboration there, and a lot of space for yeah, how do we do this inclusively? I would say they should always, I would always advocate for an intimacy coordinator, and I would be, yeah, I guess I would be fascinated to see what conversations deaf and disabled people and people working in that space could have, or deaf and disabled people leading on what intimacy looks like for our communities. So yeah, I guess, yeah, definitely have the conversation, I think, if you're being brought onto a project and thinking about how does this apply.
Absolutely. That's great. Thanks, Etta. Nathan, did you have any thoughts?
Nothing additional to what Etta's already said.
Awesome. Cool. Do we have any other questions from the chat? Just check we don't have any raised hands as well. Yes, absolutely, Katie. Katie's just said, can I have a minute? Absolutely.
And big thank you to Katie, who wrote a section in the book.
Yes.
Yeah, the chats with Katie have been wonderful.
Yeah, I think all the different sections that people wrote really lend such an insightful and deep perspective, and all I think had really amazing call to actions as well. So they were really incredible.
And there were artists too that chose not to write something specifically, but rather speak to us. And so we incorporated their ideas through the document rather than having a section to them explicitly. And that was just us catering what people wanted to put into the document and how much they wanted to see themselves in it, quite literally. Some didn't want their name in it, and that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So Katie said, deaf and disabled people always have to do the work around the logistics, like making sure the rehearsal space is accessible, getting in the support they need, doing lots of explaining and inevitable education. Who should be doing this work? Is there room for a specific person within the theatre company who supports disabled artists, or are there other groups or support systems already available?
I mean, shout out to Stace. But we don't want Stace to have to carry everybody and everything. But one of the things that we mention in the guide is sort of disability dramaturgy, and that was kind of me thinking about you know how our stories are quite sort of sacred, really, and that I mean, I don't know if that's too kind of spiritual of a word, but that they need to be cared for, that there needs to be a level of sort of treating them as treasures, and I mean, that's one way, is just to kind of acknowledge that there's, you know, a depth of experience there, and that particularly that engaging with our stories that are about exclusion and are about difficult history of oppression is a difficult thing to do. And so having that person in there and kind of acknowledging that it could be hard stuff to engage with. We also say in the guide that in terms of like, you know, casting and that kind of thing, that there should always be, if you're going to put out a call for deaf and disabled performers, that there should be a contact point for sort of access needs, and that probably should be like the production manager, somebody with some kind of control over how and sort of wider view of how the whole process runs. But then also that I guess the decisions around, or the last voice on how somebody wants their access needs to be met needs to be with the disabled person. I mean, in terms of groups and support systems available, maybe you want to speak to that actually, Stace.
Yeah, I think there are some organizations that do have specific accessibility roles within their organizations, and I know Touch Compass is one, and sometimes that will depend on the resourcing of your organization as to whether you're able to have a specific role like that. But I think it again goes back to that cultural shift and way of working. You know, like if you're putting accessibility at the center of the way that you're working, then you're not going to choose a rehearsal space, for example, unless you know it's accessible. And in terms of how you find out about that, there's organizations you can go to who do accessibility audits. I think it's, again, that collaborative process of, if you don't own or the space that you're working in is not yours, having those conversations with building owners or with whoever's operating the space to be like, hey, there's some things we can do to make this space more accessible, and bringing it back to policy and, you know, having that in your organization, because that will support you to do that work and to do that advocacy. It's also about, you know, using other tools and things that are available. So if a space you're using is run by a council and a council has a commitment to including deaf and disabled people, for example, but their space isn't accessible, going and talking to them and having those conversations, and being, you know, obviously always being led by disabled people, but being in a position to do some of that advocacy work is really helpful. So it's not falling on deaf and disabled people all the time. But yeah, always feel like you can reach out and have those conversations if you're not sure about things, because, you know, it's always essential that deaf and disabled people lead those conversations and have the ultimate say on what they want and need, as Ita said, but the responsibility of doing the work to make it happen should not be falling on that community. So yeah, and sometimes it can be, you know, just about being really clear about what your accessibility is and what it isn't, and giving people an opportunity to make an informed decision about how they want to engage with that, or whether they want to at all. Did you want to add anything, Nathan?
Yeah, purely from a production team structure, I think that it's on the producer ultimately to ensure that everyone is aligned with an accessible kaupapa, if that is part of your project, and it should be, and then ensuring from there that every other a person in your team is also actioning their work with accessibility in mind. I think that access is a significant, or barriers to access are a significant enough issue that it is beneficial to have someone on your team that is focused on that entirely. But I understand too that it's not feasible for everyone for whatever reasons. But if you can get everybody on board to share that load, otherwise there are ways of doing it. And it's a what John said in the chat, actually, I think articulates it better than I can, that access led is a focus. It's everyone's responsibility, but I do think that ultimately it's the producer to ensure that everyone on his team is on the same page as well.
Yeah, and I think there's something in it as well about sort of you know, having this collective drive for access, but there may be some very personal access needs that people have, and it's about, say, for example, for myself, one of them would be you know, assistance with costume changes, and I want to know that that's going to be a person of my choice, and that I'm not going to have to discuss the logistics of that with you know, everyone on the team, that I can just know that there's one or two people, trust them to be available to support with that, and that I only need to discuss those kind of intimate details with people of my choice. And so I guess it's about having an early discussion about you know, where are those relationships in the room, and who's available to support, but also who do you want to be supported by? Because I think also there can be a perception of you have to take the kinds of assistance and support that are on offer, that it has to that we're able, the solutions we've come up with, you know, are the ones that are on offer, and you have to either accept them or not. And I think as much as possible, companies need to be communicating their limitations to deaf and disabled artists around what access they can provide, so that those artists can make choices for themselves around how they're going to engage and what's going to feel good and what's going to feel
Absolutely.
safe and empowering.
Yeah. This should be the top of a producer's list, because when you're looking after a team of people, you need to know what their needs are, and that applies to disabled people and non-disabled people. You're taking the opportunity at the beginning of a project to get in touch with everyone and ask what their needs are in a rehearsal room space. And for some people that might be related to their disability, for others it might be related to something else. Yeah, just being fully on the same page with the people that you're working with from an access cultural standpoint, but also just knowing who they are as people and what their needs are, and then facilitating a process that looks after them properly.
Absolutely. And I think things like access riders can be really helpful for that, and making sure that sits with a particular person, so that information is only, shared as much as needed. I'll just read out what John's put in the chat as well. John from Touch Compass: we have an accessibility audit doc that we use when engaging with venues and other organizations. We also have a specific role in our org that leads access and inclusion, along with our 5 pillars that govern our everyday behaviors. It's about the kaupapa that informs your process, where when access led is a focus, then it's everyone's responsibility. Absolutely. We've also got a question from Charlotte Nightingale. Apologies if this has been answered. I was a little late to the meeting. I was wondering whether there is a strategy around getting this resource to organizations outside of the disability arts sector. I see that the resource is available at a cost. Just wondering whether there was any funding to get it on people's desks, rehearsal rooms, etc., so people have it at the forefront of their minds when planning programs. And apologies if this has been answered. You're on mute there, Nathan.
Thank you for bringing that up, Charlotte, because another barrier to access is the financial barrier, which we're aware of too. We said earlier on in the meeting, which is also applicable to this, that now that we've finished the main document for Playmarket, Ita and I will be looking into what other accessible versions of the document and the information and at how we get that out there. And so this is the kind of feedback that we love to hear, because it prioritizes for us the need for us to get this out to people and minimizing the cost in doing that. So it's in our minds, and we'll be working towards that, because I agree. I think it is useful for as many people as possible to get this.
I think at this stage, perhaps, and you can correct me, Nathan, if you don't think this would be a good approach, but yeah, if you're feeling like your company needs several copies, or that the cost is going to be prohibitive, write to Playmarket so that that's on their radar, that it's being asked for, because that, I guess, will give us that will, allow us to have a conversation about with Playmarket as the publisher about where this is going to be needed, and the print, the print runs that are needed and that kind of thing.
Awesome. I think that's bringing us to the end of our time together today. So thank you, Ita and Nathan, for sharing your perspectives and insights. And to Katie and everyone else who's put comments and questions in the chat. It's always really appreciated. I hope that you'll all check out the resource, Working Together Accessibility in Aotearoa Theatre. I think it's a really nuanced guide, and it's full of insights from deaf and disabled artists and practitioners from around Aotearoa. And as Ita said, a lot of this knowledge is deeply personal and in a lot of ways quite sacred. So I hope it will be used with generosity and carefully considered. And I think everyone will take something away from the guide, whether they're disabled or not, and whatever their level of disability awareness and access is. And yeah, as always, Arts Access Aotearoa is available to support if you have questions or you're really keen to get started and you're not quite sure how, or you want to take things to the next level. And I just want to say another huge thank you to Etta and Nathan. Really appreciate your work on this kaupapa and your time today. And also want to say thank you to Millie for your support in the background and to our interpreters for your support of the accessibility of our hui. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today. Stay well and we'll be in touch soon.